An unjust fine sparks a lawyer's fury in a luxury condo complex. The arrogant HOA president didn't know that this quiet resident had written the very rules he was trying to twist. A silent battle reveals corruption, lies, and abuse of power. Follow every step of this stunning turnaround that transformed a simple conflict into an HOA revolution. Prepare for a story of justice and redemption that will inspire you. Leave a like, subscribe, and comment with your experience with tyrannical HOA presidents. $150. $150 taped to the windshield of my imported car as if I were some common criminal who just robbed a bank. And all because I parked in a visitor spot for a mere 30 minutes. 30 minutes, people. The time it took me to go up to my apartment, grab some important documents I'd forgotten, and come back down. But apparently in the enchanted kingdom of Oak Ridge Estates, that's enough time for the almighty HOA president, Mr. Arthur, or King Arthur, as I affectionately started calling him, to decide I deserved exemplary punishment. What he didn't know, the poor fool, was that this laminated piece of paper, printed with all the pomp of the HOA logo, would be the first shot fired in a war. A war he started, but one that I would most certainly finish. You know why? Because that arrogant president forgot one tiny, minuscule detail. I'm the lawyer who drafted the bylaws for this very complex 5 years ago. I know every comma, every nuance, every loophole in that document. I know exactly what's allowed and what isn't. And a $150 fine for parking in a visitor spot for 30 minutes. That was definitely not in the bylaws I wrote. Have you ever met someone who seems to have been born with a know-it-all certificate hanging in their crib? Well, our dear President Arthur is exactly that type. A man in his early 60s who walks around the complex as if he were the emperor of a small country. The kind of person who, if he could, would wear a crown and carry a scepter while inspecting if the grass is cut to the correct height. And ever since I moved into Oak Ridge Estates, it seems I've become his favorite target. Maybe because I don't bow my head when he passes, maybe because I question his arbitrary decisions in HOA meetings, or maybe, and this is the most likely, because he feels threatened by a woman who knows the rules better than he does. That night, with heavy rain pouring down, as I looked out my apartment window and saw that ridiculous piece of paper stuck to my windshield, I made a decision. This would be King Arthur's last arbitrary act. What he didn't realize was that he had just poked the wrong bear with a very short stick. And I'll confess something to you. I'm a meticulous person, obsessively meticulous. My mind works like a perfectly organized file cabinet. Every detail, every conversation, every email exchanged, it all gets stored up here. My colleagues at the firm joke that I have a photographic memory, but it's not quite that. It's more an obsession with justice, with doing things the right way. Sometimes I wonder if this rigidity with principles pushes people away, if my insistence on following rules makes me an insufferable bore at dinners and parties. But in that moment, looking at the rain lashing the city and that unjust fine, I knew my annoying trait would be my greatest weapon. At the first HOA meeting after the fine incident, I walked into the community room as if I were entering a courtroom. Briefcase in hand, hair tied back, reading glasses hanging around my neck. I saw King Arthur sitting in his special chair. Yes, he has a different chair, taller than the others, because he needs visibility to conduct the meeting. Ridiculous, isn't it? You should have seen the look on his face when he saw me walk in. A mixture of surprise and discomfort. He knew I wouldn't let this go. Item 6 on the agenda, fine disputes, he announced, nervously shuffling his papers. We have a dispute from the resident of 1201 regarding a parking fine. Exactly, I said, standing up calmly. 50 pairs of eyes turned to me. And it's not just any parking fine, it's an illegal fine. I made sure to emphasize the last word, letting it hang in the air for a few seconds. The president cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Yes, he wears a tie to HOA meetings, believe it. The rules are clear, Counselor. Residents cannot use visitor parking. Funny you should mention that, Mr. Arthur. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a copy of the bylaws. Because according to the bylaws that I drafted, and that were approved by this assembly 5 years ago, residents can use visitor spots for periods of up to 2 hours, provided there are no events in the complex requiring all spots. And, let's see, I pretended to check my watch. On the day of the fine, there were no events unless you count your sudden urge to inconvenience me. Silence filled the room. Some residents exchanged confused glances. An elderly woman in the back asked her husband, loud enough for everyone to hear, "But didn't the bylaws say something else?" And that's when the bomb dropped. By questioning the bylaws, I discovered that our illustrious president had made some minor modifications over the past few months. Minor modifications that, by a twist of fate, primarily benefited his mother-in-law's family, who now occupied 3 garage spaces when only 1 per unit was permitted. How convenient, don't you think? These changes were approved in a special meeting. He tried to defend himself, his face growing redder. Really? And could you show us the minutes from that meeting? I asked with the sweetest smile I could muster. And you can guess, there were no minutes. There was no meeting. It was all a big lie to justify his abuses of power. By the end of that meeting, I not only got my fine overturned, but also raised the first suspicion about King Arthur's management. The colorful banners for the upcoming summer BBQ being prepared in the adjacent hall seemed to mock the situation. So festive amidst so much discomfort. But if you think the president would simply accept defeat and move on, you don't know Arthur. The following month, I started noticing something strange with my mail. Letters arrived opened, packages mysteriously disappeared for days before being found. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences, especially when they involve a disgruntled HOA president. I decided to conduct a little experiment. I installed a discreet camera in the hallway on my floor. Nothing illegal, just a small camera aimed at my own door and mailbox. And wouldn't you know it, I caught the doorman, who happens to be the president's cousin, opening my letters. Yes, my friends, things were getting dirtier than I imagined. But wait, there's more. Digging deeper, I found evidence of irregularities in the HOA's accounts over the last 6 months. Duplicate invoices, services paid for but never rendered, contracts with shell companies. What started as a simple fine dispute was turning into something much bigger. I called a meeting with the finance committee and presented my findings. You should have seen the committee members' faces. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. One of them, Mr. Wallace from the penthouse, actually choked on his coffee. But this is very serious, Councillor. Yes, Mr. Wallace, it was serious. And it was about to get even worse. In the 3rd month of our little war, I received an unexpected visitor. Guess who knocked on my door on a Tuesday night? That's right, the great president himself. Arthur looked different. The air of superiority had given way to a conciliatory smile that looked more like a grimace. Councillor, I think we got off. On the wrong foot, he said, as I watched him from the doorway, not inviting him in. I came to propose a deal. A deal? How generous of him. And what would this deal be? Simply cancel all fines applied to my unit and reduce my HOA fees by 30% for a year. In return, I should maintain discretion about the irregularities I'd discovered. In other words, shut my mouth and turn a blind eye to the corruption. Can you imagine the audacity? Did he really think that I, a lawyer with 20 years of experience, would accept such a blatant bribe? Mr. Arthur, I said, keeping my voice calm, I think you've mistaken my profession. I'm a lawyer, not an accomplice. I shut the door in his face. Satisfied, yes. But I also knew I had just declared open war, and sure enough, the next day the elevator in my building was mysteriously shut down for emergency maintenance indefinitely. So 12 flights of stairs every day. At 57, it's not exactly my favorite exercise, but if he thought that would break me, he was sorely mistaken. Every step I climbed only strengthened my determination. And by this point, I wasn't alone anymore. Mrs. Peterson, a retired teacher from the 8th floor who was also suffering from the stairs, became my ally. At 73, she still had more energy and indignation than many younger people. This can't go on, she told me one day, as we paused on the 6th floor to catch our breath. My granddaughter came to visit and had to carry my grocery cart up all these stairs. The complex's traditional annual summer BBQ was approaching, an event that was the pride of Oak Ridge Estates, famous throughout the area. Every year, the HOA invested a considerable amount to hold a memorable party. Hot cider, corn on the cob, a bonfire. Artificial, of course, we're in a condo complex. Colorful banners, live music. A real upscale block party. And it was while preparing for this party that I discovered another of King Arthur's schemes. A large part of the budget went to front companies owned by his relatives. The catering, his niece's company. The decorations, a cousin. The band, his brother-in-law. All overpriced, of course. The cider that cost $15 a gallon appeared on the expense report as $50. The desserts that any bakery would sell for $70 per hundred were charged at $200. A real party for the president's pocket and his family's. I decided to question these contracts during the event planning meeting. Bad idea. I was met with hostility from several residents who didn't want to see their beloved tradition jeopardized by, in the words of Mrs. Davis from 302, legal nitpicking. Apparently for some, the party was more important than honesty. "The councillor wants to ruin our party," someone shouted from the back of the room. "I don't want to ruin any party," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I just want the HOA's money to be used correctly. We can have an even better party for less money if we hire honest vendors." But it was hard to compete with the image of the perfect party that the president had cultivated over the years. For many, that party was the event of the year, the chance to show off to friends and relatives with a "look where I live." And Arthur knew this. He knew how to manipulate people's pride. 4 months into the conflict, I realized my reputation in the complex was tarnished. Arthur had spread rumors that I wanted to drastically increase HOA fees to create an unnecessary reserve fund. The lie spread quickly at Sunday barbecues, among morning walking groups, during mothers' meetings by the pool. Suddenly, I was the villain who wanted to end the good life at Oak Ridge Estates. I needed to restore my reputation. I decided to host a breakfast meeting in the community room, open to all residents. I ordered fresh muffins, quality coffee, homemade pastries, and I prepared a simple, clear presentation, showing exactly where the HOA money had been going in recent months. "Look closely," I explained, displaying a slide with colorful charts. "Each unit is paying, on average, 30% more than it should because of these irregularities. This means a family paying $1,000 in HOA fees could be paying $700 with no loss in service quality." Eyes widened. People started doing mental math. $300 a month, $3,600 a year. That was an argument everyone understood. "And it doesn't stop there," I continued. "The reserve fund, which should only be used for emergencies, has been systematically diverted for renovations that no one has ever seen happen. Has anyone noticed any improvements to the water pumps in the last 3 months? No? Well, $20,000 were spent on them, according to the financial statement. That breakfast meeting was a turning point. Many residents came over to my side, especially after Mrs. Peterson stood up and gave an emotional speech about integrity and respect for other people's money. As a retired teacher respected by everyone, her word carried weight. In the 5th month, the major breakthrough came. During an inspection in the basement parking garage, I discovered a serious leak near the main electrical panel, something that had been reported months ago but ignored by the president. It could cause a short circuit and leave the entire building without power, not to mention the fire hazard. I photographed everything and called an emergency general meeting. It was at this meeting, with record attendance, that I played my ace, the original copies of the bylaws, kept in my personal safe for 5 years. They proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Arthur had tampered not only with the parking rules, but with practically every regulation that limited his power. "This is a farce," he shouted, jumping up from his special chair. "These documents are fake. The councillor forged them to frame me." Luckily for me, the notary public who had witnessed the signatures 5 years earlier was an old friend and, knowing the importance of this meeting, accepted my invitation to be present. "I can confirm the authenticity of these documents," he declared, much to the president's despair. "The signatures are legitimate, as are the stamps and records." The assembly voted for Arthur's immediate removal. Victory seemed certain. But our dear president had one more trick up his sleeve. He refused to hand over the administration keys and bank account passwords. "You'll have to drag me out," he yelled, locking himself in the management office. For 3 days we were at a true impasse. The complex was divided between those demanding Arthur's immediate departure and the few who still supported him, basically, his family and some close friends, who also benefited from his schemes. Basic services began to suffer. Trash collection delayed, pool cleaning neglected, security reduced. I could have taken the lead in the revolt. Many expected me to. But I decided to work behind the scenes, guiding a group of residents who naturally emerged as leaders. My experience taught me that change needs to come from within, not imposed by a single person. Just 2 weeks before we hit the 6-month mark of this war, Arthur revealed his final trump card, a clause in the property management company's contract, signed only by him, stipulating an astronomical termination fee if there was a change in management before 1 year. The HOA didn't have the funds to pay such an amount. "Checkmate, councillor," he said with a satisfied smirk when he ran into me in the parking garage. "Unless you want to pay the penalty out of your own pocket, we'll maintain the status quo." Had no idea I had anticipated something like this. I spent the entire night reviewing the bylaws I myself had drafted 5 years earlier. And as I suspected, I found the solution. The clause requiring board approval for any contract committing more than 10% of the annual budget. The contract with the management company with that absurd penalty had never gone before the board. It was null and void. At the final meeting held in the central garden of the complex, under the flowering trees that were the pride of the residents, I presented my discovery. "The contract with the management company is void," I explained. "And we have proof that Mr. Arthur acted in bad faith by inserting this abusive clause without board approval, which also constitutes an act of malfeasance." By this point, even the president's last supporters had turned against him. The catering niece, the decorating cousin, even the mother-in-law with 3 parking spaces. Everyone realized the ship was sinking and it was time to jump. Arthur was officially removed. The keys and passwords were recovered with the help of a locksmith and an IT technician, and to my surprise, I was invited by acclamation to chair the new board. I accepted, but on one condition, that all decisions be made collectively, and that the new bylaws include control mechanisms to prevent any excessive concentration of power. I didn't want to become the new Arthur. That was my biggest fear. Exactly 6 months after receiving that unjust fine, there I was, at the same window, looking at the same parking lot, but with completely different feelings. The rain was once, again lashing the city, but inside Oak Ridge Estates the atmosphere was different. An atmosphere of renewal, transparency, community. You know, over these months, I learned something beyond how to oust a corrupt HOA president. I learned that my obsession with justice and rules wasn't a flaw. It was an asset when balanced with empathy and understanding. I learned that it's possible to be strict with principles without being inflexible with people. And most importantly, I learned that a community united by true values is invincible. Oh, and as for King Arthur, rumor has it he moved to a smaller complex across town. Apparently he's trying to run for their board president over there. Well, every community gets the leader it deserves, right? I just hope they have a meticulous lawyer among their residents. In the end, that $150 fine was the most profitable investment I ever made. Not for the financial savings it brought to all residents, which was significant, but for the sense of justice and community it restored to our complex. And that, my friends, is priceless. And you, listening to this story now, the next time you receive an unfair fine or notice, remember, knowledge is power. Don't bow your head. Don't accept absurdity as normal. Question, investigate, mobilize. You might be just one person against a system, but systems are made of people. And when good people unite, well, you saw what happened to King Arthur. Let's just say his special chair, taller than the rest, ended up being the perfect stool for kids to reach the dessert table at our first summer BBQ under new management. A poetic end, don't you think? And you know what's most ironic? Now, when I park in a visitor spot for a few minutes to grab a forgotten document, I don't get fines. I get smiles and waves. Because people understood that rules exist to serve the community, not to oppress it. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. A $150 fine turned into a lesson in civic engagement worth far more. And all because an HOA president thought he could bend the rules to his advantage, forgetting that the person who wrote them was watching his every move. Never underestimate a lawyer with a sharp memory and a keen sense of justice. Especially if she's 57 years old with stories to tell, and no fear of climbing 12 flights of stairs every day just to prove a point. Oh, and for anyone thinking of moving to Oak Ridge Estates, know that we now have available visitor parking, transparent management, and bylaws that are strictly followed, but with common sense, and most importantly, we have fresh muffins at the HOA meetings, because justice and good food always go hand in hand, don't they? Now, if you'll... Excuse me, I have a meeting to preside over. And unlike King Arthur, I don't need a taller chair to be respected. I just need to do what's right even when no one is looking, especially when no one is looking. And you, who have listened this far, remember, the next time someone tries to trample on your rights, think of me climbing 12 flights of stairs every day for a month with a briefcase full of evidence under my arm and determination in my eyes. Some battles are worth fighting, especially the ones that seem impossible to win, because in the end, it's not just about a condo complex, a corrupt president, or an unjust fine. It's about showing that right can prevail, that one person can make a difference, and that sometimes the system works, as long as you push it in the right direction hard enough. $150. That's what my fine cost. That's what the fall of King Arthur's empire cost. And that was the price I paid to rediscover the value of community and justice. A bargain, don't you think? And now, every time I pass that visitor parking spot, I can't help but smile. Because that small rectangle of asphalt was the beginning of a revolution, a quiet revolution made with papers, paragraphs, and pastries. The kind of revolution that doesn't make the history books, but completely changes the life of a community. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had simply paid that fine, if I had swallowed the injustice and moved on. How many other people would have been harmed? How much money would have been misappropriated? How long would Oak Ridge Estates have remained a small kingdom under King Arthur's tyranny? Fortunately, we'll never know, because one stubborn lawyer decided that $150 was too high a price to pay for injustice. And you, how much is your indignation worth?